G'day folks, ZiggyD here. Welcome back to part 2 of my hands-on look at the Huntress and Spear skills. If you missed part 1, it's linked in the description, so check it out first. Let's talk about the Amazon Ascendancy before we jump back into the skills. Let's take a look at some of the features here that I had a chance to have hands-on with this particular class. I took the Elemental Infusion node in Act 2 and the Critical Strikes one in Act 3, both of which are going to be very popular choices, I think, and I'll share my experiences with them both. So the Elemental Infusion grants you the skill Infuse Weapon, which causes you to gain 2 stacks of an infusion whenever you consume charges. Power charges give cold infusions, endurance, fire infusions, and frenzy lightning infusions. Whenever you make a projectile attack, an infusion stack is used to add an extra moderately sized explosion when the projectile lands at its final destination. For my throw and spear skills, this was pretty consistently where they stuck into the ground. You'll want to keep this particular aspect in mind, that infusion's explosion isn't on hit. If you pierce and so on, it's going to be where the projectile ends up. So if you're using it with a bow or something, then you might find yourself shooting into walls if you have full piercing, so you'll need to consider whether it's a good choice for your skills or not. They deal attack damage scaling off your weapon with some pretty good base damage numbers, previews showing over 600% at level 20, and since it's a character skill, it just levels and gains sockets with your character level, which is always super convenient for something like this, especially for League starting. I was using a mixture of parry and disengage, Sniper's Mark for single target, and Combat Frenzy to produce frenzy charges, and I was consuming them with Explosive Spear and Stormlance primarily. That ended up being the build that I settled into. Towards the end of my run, this kept a pretty steady stream of lightning infusions coming my way. It felt quite good, but earlier on in the run when I first got Infused Weapon, I didn't link any supports to it, and I wasn't really generating that many charges so frequently, so at the time, I kind of thought it was unimpactful and bad. It was just like a small extra pop on an already very explosive and flashy spear skill that I was using, so it was kind of hard to actually notice it doing anything. But later on I started using supports with it, and that obviously made a big difference. And the more frequent frenzy charges did mean that I had an almost constant supply of infusion, and then I started to notice it was doing a lot more. You can get a clearer look at what it looks like here in this testing that I'm doing with the basic spear throw skill. It's pretty solid at level 50-ish around here, with just like 3 somewhat random supports that I chucked onto it. It's a little bit bass guitar-ish, I think. It's going to be kind of happening in the background behind all of your other skill effects, but it's going to be that sort of thing that you probably only notice if you uninspect the node and stopped using it. So because you get 2 infusions per frenzy charge, and because they stack, you can feasibly get infusions pretty constantly during gameplay. This means the node infused avatar behind it is something you can take or leave depending on how your setup consumes and generates infusion to try and get yourself full uptime, which is probably going to be the goal for most builds. Possibly not every build will actually need this second notable, which is great. I feel like a lot of the time these are either mandatory or terrible, but this actually feels like it might be optional here depending on your setup. In the end, I was using the bullseye support for extra accuracy since it's an attack, so that works, and that was converted to a decent amount of crit chance with the critical strike ascendancy we'll talk about in a moment. That was giving me around 50% chance with no real crit scaling at this level, and this also worked well with like long shot support to lower the accuracy penalty at longer ranges and give more damage to the infusion explosions. I was also using Innovate here for a chance to give me the global lightning damage while clearing, which was up pretty often in dense areas, thanks to using exclusively frenzy charges and therefore lightning infusions. But these were basically just supports that I had lying around that weren't like good enough for my main skills. I had better supports on those already and those were full up. So they just kind of ended up here. But even just with those random eclectic collection, that worked quite well. But there are likely way better options that you can explore. Overall, I really like Infusion, and it'll be a solid clear speed boost and potentially even single target enhancement if you're getting Frenzy or pre-stacking the infusions before bosses. So the Critical Strike notable is certainly standing out to people as a core Amazon passive, and I'm here to say, yep, I think it's going to be a fundamental part of why you picked the Ascendancy. Thanks for attending my TED Talk. Normally accuracy caps out at 100%, and anything over that doesn't just do anything, so it's kind of wasted. This notable, however, converts any accuracy over that 100% to critical strike chance. It's worded like it's base crit. The devs suggested it's base crit, and to me, it looks like base crit. It quacks like a duck. When I took the node, I went from about 6% on my skills to 16 to 32% extra crit chance from that hit chance. It's got its own special line there. Now remember that accuracy scales with the distance between you and the target, and you can actually see that now with the below 2 meters which is the max, I believe, it's estimated at 132% hit chance. And then beyond that, at 9 meters, it's 116%. So you can see exactly where that range comes from, that 16 to 32 figure. Interestingly, it seems to be separate lines to the base crit chance. I thought it would just kind of be added on top. So it looks like the 6% base is probably still there doing its own thing. And then this is like added on afterwards, after it's calculated on hitting the monster. And that kind of makes sense because it needs to take into account the monster's evasion and distance from you. I kind of figured with how much crit you're getting here and the fact that it's a separate line that it would be unscalable, but looking at my crit chance later on the infusion screen, you can see the range of my crit chance is 42 to 56%, which is much higher than the 130 to 140% accuracy that I have. So there's obviously some kind of scaling going on there. That's what it's suggesting at least. Don't take it as full confirmation, just hypothetical, but the evidence looks to be there. We'll need some more testing in dev comments just to know for sure how all of this crit stuff scales together. But either way, I think this is insanely good. Giving you accuracy as an axis for scaling, crit is big for gearing and passives. All of a sudden, those wasted extra accuracy rings and things like that are actually doing something. There's a lot of places to get that as well, and there's a lot of good nodes that you might have not really looked at before because you didn't need any more accuracy, but now they're like really good crit nodes. And that lets you free up a lot of space to invest in crit damage, of course, as well. And since nodes like Falcon Dive exists, you can scale attack speed at the same time too. And there's potentially room for dex stacking since that gives accuracy, especially if something like Hand of Wisdom in action is still any good. And don't forget about Falcon Technique too, which scales dexterity, so they're kind of scaling the same thing at the same time there. And overall, this was actually impactful right from the get-go when I took it as a leveling node. Usually crit chance is something that's harder to get enough of while leveling for it to be impactful, but you get such a substantial amount here that I actually felt it while leveling, which is my like benchmark for a good, fun, notable. I want to feel it while leveling when I take it, and that is definitely the case here in the campaign. I won't comment on the rest of the Ascendancy because I didn't explicitly test them, but these are the ones I had hands on, and both infusion and accuracy crit are looking really solid to me. Next up, Blood Hunt is a pretty wicked melee attack that lunges you at a target. It interacts with the blood loss mechanic I covered in the last video for Herald of Blood. So if the target has suffered blood loss, it's consumed, and 25% of that total bleed damage is dealt as a non-scalable physical damage explosion. The area of effect of the explosion also scales up to 100% larger, depending on the amount of blood loss that they've suffered. This is a pretty great payoff skill, I think, here, and kind of a big deal for bleed builds to have something like this. It's a way to effectively trigger the bleed again for an instant damage spike, and the fact that they've built it around this blood loss mechanic instead of like triggering an existing bleed to speed it up or something, which is usually how these sorts of things are done, this is, I think, way better. It's the sum total of bleeds that you've done to the target up to that point that as this like separate blood loss mechanic is so good. It'll be a great skill to have on your bleed build when like an enemy or pack needs to die like right now. I need to get rid of them because you can pop it and not have to wait for that dot, which is obviously often a weakness of damage over time builds, that they can be in danger while they wait for something to die. You can speed things along. And of course, it's obviously really important for helping single target in bleed setups too. I did start a bleed focused second run, but I didn't have enough time to get to a high level on that. I only got a brief look at it. I didn't get to test it in a real scenario, but it looks very good. The mechanics, the numbers, everything about it looks very appealing to me. And I think it's just exactly the sort of thing that bleed builds want. It's almost a way to trigger Herald of Blood style effect earlier without needing to kill them, and it also works on bosses, which Herald of Blood obviously doesn't really. So as this is a payoff for bleed and doesn't need to actually cause bleeds itself, you can use the blood loss support to scale its damage nicely. The new blood in the eyes support as well should be a pretty interesting option here on Amazons, because Hobble as a mechanic lowers evasion, effectively allowing you to scale your crit chance further. If the enemy's evasion is lower, your effective hit chance is higher, and thus your crit is higher with that node. So that'd be pretty nice for boosting your damage for your next bleed and then the next blood hunt after it. And don't forget the new rip and tear supports as well, which seem like a good pairing with this, if you're using it primarily for clearing at least. Give you some big life recovery scaling. Now, just a quick note that Glacial Lance wasn't working in the build that I played. It's an Ice Throne Spear skill, but it's got the wrong icon and it wasn't really playable, so we'll have to wait and see on that one. I can't give you any look at that one. The only other ice skill is Fangs of Frost, and having that freeze is really useful for combat frenzies, for generating frenzy charges, so having a ranged option to do that could be really good, but we'll have to wait and see what the skill does. I know nothing about it. Sniper's Mark obviously isn't a new skill, but it's the other option on gem level 7 skills here. and it's quite relevant as a way to generate frenzy charges on bosses on demand without needing to parry. So that's pretty helpful for your damage output. You drop a mark on them, causing the next crit you deal to get some extra decent bonus damage to critical hit damage, which is either good or not that important depending on the skill you're doing. If you just hit them with a small hit and consume that, you're not really going to get much damage in the end. But more importantly really is the fact that the mark is consumed when you crit the target to give you a frenzy charge so that you can do your empowered spear throw and generate infusions and all of that good stuff. The perfusion support gives you a chance at an extra charge too, so it's obviously a good pairing here. And Sniper's Mark, like all marks, is pretty mana hungry, so you will have to restrain yourself from spamming it too much, which is really what this skill wants you to do. I used Inspiration to help a little bit, lower those mana costs. With the Frenetic passive from the skill tree and the perfusion support, I was able to get pretty consistent frenzy charges in boss fights with this, with just recasting Sniper's Mark every so often between volleys of thrown spears. It's not really something you have to do, but it is a pretty nice boost to your damage to weave in there. On to gem level 9. The first skill we're taking a look at here is Thunderous Leap, a very satisfying movement skill akin to Leap Slam. It doesn't seem to be quite as fast as Leap Slam, and I couldn't really animation cancel the landing like you can with it to speed it up, but still overall combined with Dodge Roll and Disengage, this skill gives you a ton of mobility, and of course, the most important feature, the ability to jump over gaps and ledges. Apart from lightning conversion, this skill does one other important thing. It's a detonator. So you can use it to jump on your Storm Lancers, Explosive Spears, and the Rapid Assault Stuck Spears to explode them. And that is super satisfying. Because it's a slam too, you can use Fist of War for 20% more damage in AoE, which makes it even more satisfying to leap in and blow up a bunch of spears. Really, it's just such a nice thing that they threw into this archetype to be able to, you've thrown those ranged spears, they're just sitting there, instead of waiting for them to explode, you jump in and do melee damage, and that explodes them, and that feels very epic. I think every spear build will use this either for mobility, for blowing up thrown spears, even bleed builds as a way to detonate those stuck spearheads, and there's just so much utility for skills like this too, like Shocking Leap for shocked ground, Jagged Ground to slow enemies, or Holy Descent for consecrated ground to heal you. I personally will never not use this skill on a spear build. So Bloodhound's Mark is a new mark skill for, you guessed it, bleed builds, pretty obvious. This one's pretty different. It causes the marked target to gain heavy stun buildup from blood loss. I don't think we've ever seen a damage over time contributes to stun buildup effect like this before, and that's pretty cool for bossing or for dealing with nasty rares. The second part of the skill is that when the marked target dies or gets heavy stunned, there's a bleed explosion, much like Herald of Blood or Blood Hunt, with a little bit of a twist. The explosion deals its own base physical damage as an attack in an area, and it doesn't scale with your weapon. It gains up to 100% more area and damage based on specifically how much heavy stun has been caused by blood loss specifically. So the more you're focused on bleeds, the chunkier it's going to be. Fortunately, Bloodhound's Mark doesn't compete with Blood Hunt and Herald of Blood though, in that it doesn't consume the blood loss. That's really key here. Only the mark itself is consumed, and the damage from Bloodhound's Mark is its own independent thing. That means it can stack with those other effects. The explosion seems like, to me, a bit of a bonus aspect of it. You can scale it with supports and things like that, but I think the real allure of this gem is enabling stun on a build that's primarily focused on damage over time, something that you wouldn't normally get. And getting a heavy stun is, of course, how you can make use of the Rupture support to aggravate bleeds, which is essential for bleed DPS. After all, a heavy stun target is sitting still and not moving around, so they're not taking that bonus damage, so you'd kind of be like doing yourself a disservice there, but thankfully that support exists. I think Rupture would be amazing on Bloodhound Marks itself, since it will hit the heavy stunned enemy with the explosion, so it should work. We'd need to make it just double sure with a bit of testing, but that seems like it would work. The final new level 9 gem here is Tame Beast. A pretty significant one for a lot of different builds potentially here. This technically isn't a spear skill, just kind of themed to the Huntress, but anyone can use it. It has some awesome utility potential as it lets you choose a rare beast type monster and basically put it in a Pokeball. The gem you cut itself is actually Tame Beast, which gives you a skill to hinder a beast. Then if you kill that hindered beast, the gem is converted into a companion gem with that beast permanently locked inside it. These stored beasts can be stashed and swapped around whenever you want, but there is one unique restriction here. They cannot be traded to other players, and that's a massive relief because otherwise the economically correct decision would be to always have like a bunch of tame beast gems in your inventory to catch any valuable beasts you run across to sell. And that'd be fun for a minute, but it'd very quickly get old. Anyway, the now tamed beast is a spirit skill with a percentage spirit cost based on some kind of math about how significant that specific beast is. Presumably bigger, stronger beasts take more spirit and little grubs take less, but I don't really know how things like auras are factored in. What exactly scales that number? Something that people will figure out over time. Activating the beast summons it, and the great news here is that if it dies, it revives automatically after a few seconds. I'm so glad we're over the like resummoning golems meta, and we just have these things just auto-summon now. One of my favorite changes about minions and companions and things in PoE2. You can see the beast's type and the modifiers on the gem itself, and any core skills and bonus rare modifier effects are all able to be used to your benefit from the beast. I was testing this pretty early on this build, so they were actively working to get the, I don't know, like hundreds or thousands of monster skills and effects to just work for the player and not like accidentally kill them or do other random stuff. So not everything I tested during this hands-on worked. Like I got a monster that had energy shield aura and it wasn't working, but energy shield auras will work. The first beast I got was this cute roly-poly. And since the aura wasn't working yet, I gave it some pats and I sent it on its way after a little while. And I found a walking fish with shocked ground skill that did work. This was really cool for wind skills because it was an easy activator for that bonus added lightning damage, and it had a fair amount of uptime. And since you can support these companions, you can put things like increased area of effect or the ingenuity support to scale uptime of skills like this, and you know, look at their coverage and all that. I used this little fishy bro for quite a long time and I was pretty happy with him tagging along to shock enemies, just doing his job. Much later on, I tested a beast that had a healing pulse and I was really impressed with how much healing it did. It was like a really powerful flask effect and it happened pretty often. That pulse also suppresses enemy healing too, so it'll deal with any like regens and annoying stuff like that. And of course you can reduce the cooldown and things like that on it too. So as this is a companion, which is a new type of minion effectively, you're limited to just one companion, so one tamed beast. And you will also have to choose between this or the rower, as that's also a companion, the rower mount. Unless, that is, you pick up the new trusted kinship keystone that lets you have one of each. I didn't get to test the rower sadly, as it was a bit higher level in a spirit gem, so I couldn't just get my hands on one. It could be a little bit tricky for a while there. That keystone does come with a defensive downside, but that's probably because of things like the new loyalty companion support skill that shifts 10% of the damage you take to your companion, so that's really nice as well, along with just like the utility of companions, I suppose. So I don't know how worth it that keystone will be. 30% loss of evasion is not great, but we'll see what sort of utility these two things bring, and if you just can't live without a rower and a tamed beast, then you may well want to pick that one up. Tamed Beast overall is frankly nuts. I can't believe the work ZiggyD has made for themselves with this and Spectres to just test and tune every single monster ability and rare modifier and all that. There's just like a limitless amount of options for beast companions and rare modifiers here. And I've only really been thinking about things like utility, like auras and ground effects and healing pulses. I'm not sure if there's also going to be some decent damage potential with these things too, or other status effects that can be done by certain specific creatures that do something that does something we don't ever even thought about up to this point. It's going to be a fun experience of looking at all of the beasts you encounter and just being like, I wonder if that's going to be something I should get. There's also plenty of support on the tree to scale them, and a damage cluster down in the Huntress area even lets you scale both your companion damage and yours with the same nodes, reminiscent of the minion damage notable from PoE 1. And to be honest, this looks good even without a companion for like those, you know, those builds that have damage types that are a little bit harder to scale, like bleed and poison. On the topic of spirit skills, Caltrops is a spirit skill that drops 3 Caltrops whenever you dodge roll. They deal a little bit of physical damage and maim on hit. I was a bit disappointed though to find out that they don't work with disengage. I know disengage isn't dodge roll, but it kind of works in much the same way, and I half hoped that it would. Disengaged Caltrops would have been really fun and maybe want to use this a bit more. It's a pretty low impact skill, to be honest. Maim is just easy to get elsewhere. Even just like the maiming strike notable in the Huntress area is like right there on the main path, and it's kind of good for damage anyway. It does have some cute details, like the damage scales with thorn scaling, and since they're a projectile, I guess you could use scatter shot, which I didn't think to test at the time. And if you're scaling hazards for a spearfield build, then there's some synergy there, but overall I only really see this getting some niche use for the just trade-off of using this instead of another spirit skill. I think there's other better options for most builds, right? I like the idea, but it seems kind of hard to justify, I think, in most builds, unless there's some like nice nice utility from certain supports or items that I'm missing. I'll probably look like an idiot when it's discovered that there's some super easy giga-busted combination here that everyone ends up using. Prove me wrong. On to level 11 gems. The first of the two level 11s we have our Elemental Sundering, which is a build-around elemental attack designed to detonate, freeze, ignite, and shock on enemies or corpses. Just a note, this gem was a bit unfinished here, playable, but it was missing effects and such, so we'll only take a brief look at it. The skill does no damage with the initial pulse, but the pulse detonates any statuses in the area, basically. The explosion damage ranges from very high on frozen enemies to lower on the shocked and ignited ones, since you know, those are easier to apply ultimately. Ground effects do work with this as well, so you can detonate them, or more specifically, like a shock ground, the shock that it applies to an enemy can be detonated. And that shock ground, if it's still there, will just reapply that after a short delay. The real potential for this one seems to be if you have some nice like proliferation style effects or lots of lingering ignites and such on corpses, so that you can get a lot of overlapping explosions to blast down rares and big packs, but it's kind of hard to judge how good this one's going to be. The use case is a bit unusual in that it requires you to apply ailments to many enemies to do much with it, and in most cases if you're doing that the enemies are going to be dead and unless there's a bunch of enemies in that same place and then you can detonate the corpses, you're not really going to need to use it a lot of the time, which was ultimately the case for me while leveling. But I'm not ready to write this skill off, as I think there will be some strong uses for it. It seems like one of those skills that someone's going to figure out how to break the game with. The other level 11 skill is Whirlwind Lance, which is a thrown spear that creates whirlwinds. Same as Whirling Slash. Whirlwinds are kind of their own separate secondary skill effect, and this creates them too. The lance is a simple but somewhat hard-hitting spear throw. If it kills something, it creates a stage 3 whirlwind straight up, normally just stage 1, and it'll also consume a frenzy charge if able to create a stage 3 whirlwind, so you've got two ways of doing that there. A big difference between this and Whirling Slash, besides being a ranged attack, is that you can throw and boost whirlwinds up stages still, but you can also create up to 5 separate whirlwinds in different locations if you position them far enough away from each other. The whirlwinds work a little differently here too. These whirlwinds collapse and explode not when you leave them, since you're not even in them to begin with, but when you actually enter them for the first time. So you can place them and then dash in, maybe for a melee attack or something, to explode them. It's the opposite of Whirling Slash, which detonates when you leave them. It seems like both Barrage and Scattershot could work with this, but I didn't get a chance to test this skill too much. I'm guessing it means that if you threw 3 spears or if you barraged, you would be effectively always creating stage 3 whirlwinds, which could be good. Overall, it's kind of a tough skill to judge. It seems like it has pretty good potential, and you can of course use it as a combo piece to create whirlwinds to empower your twisters at range, which might be the primary use case maybe. Level 12 skills are typically the big cooldown or payoff finisher style skills, and that's certainly the case here. The first is Wind Serpent's Fury. It's the only melee spear attack I believe that uses frenzy charges. The rest are all ranged attacks. On use, it thrusts your spear forwards and consumes all frenzy charges to create a twisting wind serpent per frenzy charge consumed. The thrust itself is a slow but pretty heavy hitting attack with built-in knockback, and each serpent also hits and knocks back enemies as well, with increased distance against unique enemies, which is kind of necessary as often unique enemies are just not very pushable. This skill is designed to push things that you can't normally push. If you do manage to push a smaller enemy into a bigger one, or any enemy into a wall, then the skill also creates a shockwave that deals extra damage in an area. And I imagine scaling, knockback range, and things like that are probably going to be where this skill starts to really shine, especially in tight maps where you can get a lot of enemies to kind of just smash into each other and then smash into a wall for a whole bunch of shockwaves. Probably going to be very satisfying. It's really hard to see the potential here from just the footage of me testing it briefly, but I think in, you know, the right build, that especially something that's able to generate frenzy charges consistently, we're going to see, like, I don't know, builds one-shotting bosses with this by just bullying them into a wall. Since this has no cooldown, you can probably use it really often as well, so as long as you can just keep those frenzy charges going, you can keep blasting snakes all over the map. It's likely very much a build-around skill, and probably a pretty good one, I suspect. Spira Solaris is the final skill, and it certainly stands out. Quite delightfully over the top indeed. Spear of Solaris is a 30-second cooldown, sustained AoE projectile skill. You throw a spear into the air while jumping backwards, and after a moment the spear lands for a heavy hit of damage that cannot be evaded. Then a big old orbital beam from the sun fires down and pulses fire damage rapidly for 4 seconds. It also drops expanding burning ground with pretty high damage that gets stronger over time until it peaks right before expiring. So you can't add projectiles to do shenanigans with that. And it also doesn't have a duration tag, so you can't kind of extend the duration of the beam. seem, but as it is a cooldown skill, you can indeed use the second wind support to get down 2 of them for the trade-off of a longer cooldown, which I think is kind of a non-issue here, because if your plan is only really to use this at the start of a boss fight or something, then that's a pretty good choice. While it doesn't have a duration tag, the Burning Ground should still be supportable with Despoiler, I suspect. That'll need testing, and it's got some pretty big damage on that Burning Ground, so it could really be worth it to have that stick around for longer. Generally speaking, with big cooldown skills like this, the question is always just whether you want to dedicate the skill slot and the supports that could go elsewhere to something that you can't use constantly. It's hard to say. I didn't feel like it was too worthwhile during leveling, and I had a lot of skills competing for my attention on the Huntress and on the spears in general, but it's got some really big numbers, so I'm sure it'll see some use in endgame. Honestly, its biggest downside is that it's just a bit too epic. You can't really see anything when you use it, especially if you use 2 of them. I have no idea what the boss is doing when it's getting beamed. So that's the skill overview done. I hope you enjoyed these early looks at the Huntress and the spear skills and mechanics. While not all of the skills clicked with me, many of them did, and really importantly, the fundamentals like parry, disengage, thunderous leap, and that whole melee range mix just felt really good to me. The Huntress and spears are a complex playstyle with lots of possible interactions to explore. You could honestly spend a season just messing with builds in this one archetype. I loved the explosive spear and storm lance combination for elemental, and the bleed skills felt really fun in general. I do really hope that bleed comes together, because I know the damage type as a whole had a lot of issues in 0.1, but hopefully here with a fair bit more support, it'll be worthwhile now, because that bleed playstyle is really appealing to me, and I want those skills to be good because they feel and look really good. I think the safest choice is going to be the elemental approach with wind skills or frenzy spear throws, so I don't think you can go wrong with either of those if those look appealing to you. And Amazon overall as a class is really flexible because it's going to work with both elemental and bleed setups just fine. That crit scaling is a really good choice for those. I haven't decided which route I'll go with. Maybe after the patch notes, I'll see if bleed looks like it's going to be good enough as a whole, because those skills and that playstyle seem the most fun and dynamic to me. I'm just a little bit concerned about single target, but AoE clear is obviously going to be fine with Herald of Blood and Rake. Anyway, I'll try and do some leveling theorycraft guides maybe if I have some time after these videos, or something after launch, either way. But that's it for now. I'm ZiggyD, and thanks for watching.